struggling with the dative case like I was. So, we're going to start with an explanation of what the dative case is and how we use it, and how it compares to the other cases, which would be genitive, nominative, and accusative. Followed by what it means to actually understand the dative case. So basically, why the dative case is used, and how the case affects the meaning of what you're saying. And since it affects the meaning, I'll also include some examples of what you're actually saying when you mess up and use the wrong case. I'll conclude with a short little quiz to test yourself, and a list of resources I found helpful that you can use as well. So first off, German has different cases that are used to describe and classify what nouns in a sentence are doing. Nouns in the nominative case are typically marking the subject of a verb, or in other words, the noun that is doing something. Accusative case marks the distinction for the direct object, or the recipient of the action given by the verb. Genitive nouns show nouns in the possessive. And finally, the dative case is the English equivalent of the indirect object, which, as we all should know from elementary school grammar, is the recipient of the direct object. In the sentence, John gives his mother a picture. Picture is the direct object, because that's what John gives, and his mother would be the indirect object, because she's the one getting the picture. Get the picture? German marks nouns in the dative case by changing the article of the noun. So here's a chart that shows how it changes the different genders in the plural form. So the masculine dative articles are changed to dem, as are the neutral ones, and the feminine definite articles are changed to der, and plurals are changed to den. And it's the same for the indefinite articles as well. So M, er, and then n. So if you want to say that John gives his mother a picture, mother is the indirect object, the recipient of the picture, and thus needs to appear in the dative case. If, however, you don't put mother in the dative case and you don't change the article accordingly, you will say something like, John gives his mother his picture, basically listing an incomplete sentence listing things that John is giving away without indicating to whom he's giving them. Another example with a masculine noun would be, the man gives the dog water. It wouldn't be der Mann gibt der Hund Wasser or even der Mann gibt den Hund Wasser, because in neither of those examples is Hund in the dative case, and thus it is not marked as the indirect object, the recipient of the action. In other words, it means something other than the recipient. To change its meaning so that it is the recipient, you have to change der Hund, or den Hund, to dem Hund, because it's the indirect object and is answering the question, to whom. However, this explanation of dative being the marker for indirect object isn't the entire story. Dative case also includes nouns that fulfill one of four functions in a sentence, being either the recipient, the experiencer, the beneficiary, or the minus possessor. The recipient role is the normal situation, such as in the previous examples. However, in the sentence, Das Wasser war dem Baby zu heiß, the dative case is used on dem Baby, but baby isn't technically the indirect object of the sentence. In this example, the baby is experiencing the sensation of hot. So, broadly stated, an experiencer is an individual who is perceived as affected by an action, process, or state taking place. The beneficiary role is closely related to the recipient role. However, the direct object doesn't necessarily need to be a concrete object. It could be, as in the case of this example, Hans repariert mir das Fahrrad. However, it could also be part of the beneficiaries themselves, such as Die Mutter wusch mir die Hände, where the hands are actually a part of myself, like mir. And finally, the minus possessor is when the direction of the object transfer is reversed. So in this role, the dative participant either loses control of a possession or a lack of possession is pointed out. So in this sentence, the student loses control of the direct object, or the pen, that they originally possessed. And in this example, the participant lacked the direct object in the first place, which is the necessary experience. So what does all of this mean? Well, first, it means that in order to truly understand the dative case, we need a more expansive, comprehensive, and functional explanation of the case. If you only think as far as the indirect object, you're never going to reach the entirety of the case. In addition to indicating the meaning and function of a noun in a sentence, the dative case, and all cases for that matter, give the user some flexibility with word order in German. In English, because we don't change the article to mark the case, we're forced to say, he gave the dog the water. We can't say, he gave the water the dog, because that doesn't make any sense. In other words, the indirect object has to precede the direct object in German. That is, unless you use the preposition to. He gave the water to the dog. But that is an English phenomenon and not one that's relevant for German. In another example, in English we can say, I gave the woman the pen without any second thought as to what is being given or to whom it's being given because of how the language itself is structured. And if we were to say, I gave the pen the woman, it would mean that the woman were being given to the pen. In German, because we mark each case by changing the article, it's possible to move the indirect object around in a sentence without confusing the reader or changing the meaning in any substantial way. So, in the example of gab dem Hund das Wasser, you could also say gab das Wasser dem Hund, das Wasser gab dem Hund, and dem Hund gab das Wasser, and they all have the exact same meaning because the case of the nouns and not their order in the sentence expresses the meaning of the sentence. Having said that, the standard word order in German for the indirect object is in fact like English, before the direct object. In other words, these other examples, while possible and not affecting the meaning in any substantial way, are unusual in German and would appear in very specific situations in which the speaker decides to not follow standard word order in order to achieve a particular communicative effect. But that's not all. There are also prepositions that turn everything in the prepositional phrase to dative and verbs that turn direct objects to dative, but that's a lesson for another day. For now, we're sticking to the basics of the dative case as the marker for recipient, beneficiary, possessor, or experiencer of an action. And now that you know a little more, let's fix up these incorrectly written sentences. First, think about what the sentence is trying to say as compared to what it's actually saying. For example, this first sentence is trying to say, I always give my sister flowers for her birthday. But the way it's written actually implies that you're giving away your sister. In order to correct it, you have to change meine to meiner. And which article would you use in this sentence? Der Mann fragt sein Boss für Papier. You would have to say, der Mann fragt seinem Boss für Papier.